A few months ago, Valve announced they were discontinuing the SteamLink, their network-based games console that allowed you to stream your desktop PC games over your home network to a TV or another monitor. But they're not abandoning the idea entirely, and in fact, they've recently released an application for the Raspberry Pi that allows you to do the same exact thing. But which one's better? Seeing as how it's the beginning of April and I haven't followed my New Year's resolution to start losing weight and drink a little bit less beer, I figured I might as well just start drinking light beer. So today, in honor of that, we're going to be opening a Bud Light and drinking that for you all. Not quite as bad as I remember. A little bit darker, but still nice and clear. That golden amber color to it, and no corn syrup. That's nice. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. Like I said, today we're going to take a look at both the Raspberry Pi 3 as well as the SteamLink and see if there's a difference in performance when streaming games from your desktop PC, both over a wired and wireless network connection. Let's start out just by walking through the specs of both of these, starting with the SteamLink. It was released by Valve in November 2015, sporting an ARM v7 processor, 512 megabytes of memory, and 4 gigabytes of onboard storage. Networking is handled by onboard fast Ethernet at 100 megabit per second, or 802.11ac Wi-Fi at 5 gigahertz. For connecting your controllers or any other devices you'd like to it, it's got 3 USB Type-A ports along with Bluetooth 4.2. The HDMI port on board also supports up to 1080p at 60 FPS. Moving on to the Raspberry Pi 3, which is the lowest model that you can actually install the SteamLink application onto. This is also sporting an ARM-based processor, but this time of the Cortex-A53 variety. It's got 1 gigabyte of LPDDR2 memory and no onboard storage. That's instead handled by a microSD card that you supply. Network-wise, the Raspberry Pi 3 also sports fast Ethernet for connections of up to 100 megabit per second over wired, but this is an instance where the term bottleneck is actually accurately applied. The Ethernet port on here is actually wired through the USB controller, which limits your actual throughput to about 35 to 40 megabit per second. The Wi-Fi onboard the Raspberry Pi 3 is also a noticeable step down from the SteamLink, from 802.11ac at 5 GHz to 802.11n at 2.4. But with the data rates we're going to be talking about with game streaming, is that really going to matter in the real world? As for the rest of the connectivity, there's 4 USB Type-A ports along with Bluetooth 4.0 for devices or controllers, and the HDMI port supports up to 1080p at 60 FPS. As far as setting these devices up, the SteamLink definitely has the win here. Simply take it out of the box, plug it in, and walk through the simple on-screen setup guide. The Raspberry Pi 3 is slightly more involved, seeing as how you're buying the bare board itself and then supplying your own case, power supply, and microSD card, although that process is overall very trivial. Imaging the SD card is pretty simple thanks to programs like Etcher, and Raspberry Pi has put a significant amount of work into their on-screen wizard, which helps you get up and going inside of Raspbian. To install the SteamLink app, simply go to the Add Remove Programs application and search for Steam, and then check the little box next to SteamLink when it pops up. Once both devices are set up, the interface is very much the same. The SteamLink does have a few more options inside of its settings menus for things like display and audio output, although the Raspberry Pi 3 does rely on Raspbian for the bulk of its settings. About the only thing left to do at this point is to select which machine you'd like to stream from and start gaming. Once you do start streaming, Big Picture Mode will be launched on both devices, and the interface will be absolutely identical from this point out. I'm also really happy to report that both devices performed identically in the menus. Whether I was using a keyboard and mouse or the Xbox 360 wireless controller, navigating the menus was snappy and responsive on both devices. But speaking of both input options, I wanted to test games that took advantage of either of those, as I could very easily see someone using either input device on a TV or a secondary monitor. For the keyboard, I went ahead and played Doom, and for the controller, I played GTA 5. Now, this is kind of a confession for PC Master Race people. I fully use a controller on GTA 5, and most Rockstar games for that matter. I hate their keyboard and mouse layout. And just as a reminder, I'm also going to be testing wired and wireless Ethernet connectivity on both of these devices. So, let's get started. Very happy to say that as far as input testing, both the Raspberry Pi 3 and the SteamLink performed pretty much identically as long as they were over wired Ethernet, and we'll get into that in just a second. Now, when I talk about input latency in regards to in-home streaming, I'm not talking about internet latency or latency that you would experience when playing an online game, which can sometimes rank up in the 20, 25, or even 30 millisecond range. Input latency never really exceeded 1 millisecond as far as I can tell, which is pretty much perfect as far as network gaming goes. Display latency ran between 14 and about 20 milliseconds, which is equivalent to running about 1 to 1.5 frames behind what you see on the screen. So overall, if you have a wired Ethernet connection going into either of these devices, regardless of your input choice or your display choice, your performance is going to be pretty darn equal. But oh, wired Ethernet is not the whole story. Let's talk about Wi-Fi. So, as I said, the SteamLink box from Valve has an 802.11ac gigabit Wi-Fi at 5 gigahertz. Now, I'm sure this device is not actually capable of connecting at gigabit speeds. In fact, I'd be shocked if it was able to transfer more than 250 megabit per second. But 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi is by far lower latency than 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, which is what's in the Raspberry Pi 3. But again, the Wi-Fi on the Raspberry Pi 3 uses the same USB connection as the wired Ethernet does, so you're going to be limited to the same 35 to 40 megabit throughput that you are on the wired Ethernet connection, and you're going to suffer more latency due to the 2.4 gigahertz connection. So how does all that translate into actual real-world experience? Well, I tested both these devices on the same spot in my desk in the same orientation, so they had access to the same exact Wi-Fi signal. The SteamLink, there's honestly no difference between the wired Ethernet connection and the wireless connection, and I was really shocked by that. The input latency sometimes fluctuated up to about 2 milliseconds, and the display latency I did see hit 30 milliseconds on a couple different occasions. But we're still talking about a less than 2-frame delay over the host computer. And honestly, when I'm talking about streaming to my downstairs TV, that's pretty darn good. But oh, Wi-Fi. It seems that's going to be the Achilles heel to the Raspberry Pi 3 experience. So, inside of big picture mode, this actually did work quite well. It was able to navigate the menus and launch my games, and I was able to get into the games. However, especially with GTA 5, once I was actually in the game, I would play for about 10 seconds at a time, and then the picture would freeze for 1 to 2 seconds, as this just couldn't keep up with the decoding demands over the Wi-Fi connection. And there was one instance, in fact, where the Raspberry Pi 3 froze the video stream entirely and refused to recover, although the input was still passing through to Steam, so I just had a static image of GTA 5 on screen. So where does that leave us? Well, I think the SteamLink is a fantastic device. In fact, I bought mine a little over 2 years ago, and I do use this pretty frequently inside my house to stream games to my TV. And I think it's a little bit of a shame that Valve is discontinuing this hardware. I'm sure Valve wasn't making any money at all off the SteamLink at $50, and in fact, most of them sold for between $5 and $10 on Steam sales. And if you remember, the Raspberry Pi 3 sells at cost, minus the couple dollars profit that the manufacturers get from the case and the SD card that you have to buy to go with it. But the Raspberry Pi Foundation isn't making any money at all off the hardware itself. As far as the Raspberry Pi 3 on SteamLink goes, I think it performs admirably so long as it's on a wired Ethernet connection. When it goes to Wi-Fi, it's pretty much a no-go in my book. That's going to do it for this one, guys. Let me know down in the comments, did you purchase a SteamLink, or are you interested in building yourself a Raspberry Pi 3 to use at home for one? Let me know down below. Be sure to like this video if you liked it, or dislike it if you didn't like it, and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing, and follow the Amazon affiliate links down below if you want to find out what parts I used inside of this Raspberry Pi 3 so you can build one for yourself. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this one, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.